What's good, family? And welcome back to the RPM Vinyl Podcast. I'm your host, Emmanuel, and I am back with my podcast partner, Chris. And, we just want to close out the month of June, which is Black Music Month, very strong. So, what we want to do to close out the month is highlight some of our favorite albums, hip hop albums from the 80s and 90s. We would say that these are critically acclaimed albums. These are albums that were important to two different decades, the 80s and the 90s. And these were just classics that shaped the culture, influenced fashion, language, production, inspired generations of artists around the world, and continue to inspire artists to this day. So, Chris, you selected the 1980s, obviously one of the more important eras of hip hop. Take us through some of the critically acclaimed albums that you've identified from the 1980s.
Well, I'm going to start off with my favorite MC from the 80s. And, this is debatable on a lot of people's list, but I got to say he's got to definitely be my top MC from the 80s is Big Daddy Kane and Long Live the Kane. I feel like this album, there was nothing like it when it came out. Big Daddy Kane came on the scene with just a very unique flow, lyricism, wordplay, punchlines, a great battle rapper. You think about Raw and Set It Off and Ain't No Half Steppin', just all classic songs that still sound good today and still sound, the test of time. And so I heard he's getting ready to come out with I think it was his last album. I think I was hearing lately.
Man,
And
he been dusting cats on social media. I know that
yeah,
some cats wasn't really respecting him, and he shot off a 16 real quick. So
yeah, yeah.
I think
I
he
mean,
stayed ready.
yeah, from time to time, I mean, you hear him like, come out with some freestyles and just, rock over these beats and he still got it, man. He's still an incredible MC. So shout out to Big Daddy Kane.
No doubt.
The next I have to say is a group that I talk about all the time just because I feel like they were ahead of their time. They kind of ushered in a movement, a sound that was all unique, but really a lot of groups that sort of piggybacked off their style came a whole 10 years afterwards, right? And I think this was an album that really birthed the underground scene of the 90s. But this came out in the 80s and it's Ultramagnetic MC's Critical Beatdown. I feel like the production, the wordplay, I mean, you look at Set G, Cool Keith, who's one of the most criminally underrated rappers that I think has ever came in the hip hop scene. You think about all the aliases that he had after this, and just he really brought an interesting wordplay to the game of hip hop. And so, Critical Beatdown, very underrated from a production and a lyrical standpoint. Next, I got to go with we're gonna take this to the Bay Area and out of the Bay Area, there wasn't a ton of hip hop that was coming through the 80s. And so I feel like he really put the Bay Area on the map. And a lot of MCs who came out of that Bay Area owe a lot to this man because this dude, he was a trendsetter, visionary. He had his own style of all of his own. And, some could say maybe not wasn't the most lyrically impressive of his day, but I think it's just his style and charisma, flair, and that's Too Short. And Life is Too
Not
Short.
sure.
It's a great, great album. I mean, I even like the simplistic production that you hear on this. I mean, not a ton of samples, but a lot of great 808 type beats. And I just love his flow. I mean, sometimes some of the best MCs are not the most lyrically impressive, but they've got, one of the most incredible flows that just flows good over any beat. And Too Short is one of those MCs. And this is unsung album here.
You'd be surprised, man. In my neighborhood growing up, Too Short, it was a staple. So I'm very, very familiar with my man Todd Shaw. And I too am a Too Short appreciator, man.
Yes, man. And then we talk about Big Daddy Kane. And so when you talk about Big Daddy Kane, it's hard to not put this other incredible MC in the same light. And when we talk about an MC that comes on the scene incredible flow, incredible delivery, a style all his own that it sparked many fighters, I would say, that came through the 90s and everybody was trying to emulate his flow. And that's Rakim. I mean, this right here is a staple album. Follow the Leader. It's got one of the greatest songs ever in hip hop, which is Microphone Fiend. Just so many quotables. I mean, you know, an album is incredible and you know, an MC is incredible when you think about all of the hip hop that scratched vocals from Microphone Fiend. Like, how many times have you ever heard and then MCs that had actually copied the same some of the same lyrics and phrases right from Microphone Fiend. That lets you know its impact. And, you know, it's not only just the emceeing and the production, but it's also just, you know, the flair of the outfits, you know, the Dapper Dan outfits, right? The Gucci outfits, the gold necklaces. I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, it doesn't get no more 80s than this. This is essential album.
Can't argue with Rakim, man. Arabian Rakim, no question.
Definitely, definitely. And then let's say this is one of the greatest duos of all time. They also brought some originality, and that's really what I'm trying to portray in these picks is that all of these MCs, you know, they brought something new to the game that inspired a generation. And what more can be said about Eric and Parrish, EPMD? You know, Eric kind of had that kind of like lazy kind of flow, you know, that sounded so good, and then you know, Parrish had some great wordplay, and who can forget the production? I mean, you know, "You Got to Chill" is just one of the most incredible songs ever, and you know, there was a lot of artists that sampled Zap, right? And this is probably my hands down my favorite of, sampling Zap and just, and then you hear about all of the ways that they made this album, which was so incredible. It's like, hearing that they, didn't have samplers and they used to have to take a tape reel and loop the whole song over and over, right? And, add a drum machine to that. And it's just, that's crazy to think that that's like how this album was actually constructed, right? Without a sampler, and so shout out to EPMD, one of the greatest duos ever. Strictly business.
Again, another group that in Detroit we rock with EPMD for sure.
Definitely. And you know what? They have a importance of, turning a lot of West Coast heads onto them sampling Zap, bringing that West Coast kind of like funk to the music. So shout out to EPMD.
You got a lot of Long Island in your list.
A lot of Long Island, man. I don't know. It's something about that area, man.
Mhm.
All right, man. What's on your list?
Okay, so I'm going to start the 90s decade with A Tribe Called Quest Low End Theory. Now, some people may be surprised with the selection of the Low End Theory, but I'm going to tell you why. So we're talking 1991. I believe the Low End Theory redefined what hip hop should sound like by blending jazz, live instruments, obviously the lyrics. Tribe proved that rap can be intelligent, soulful, while being innovative without sacrificing the authenticity and the chemistry between the group, mainly Q-Tip and Fife. I believe they established an alternative hip hop. And I believe that, other producers for, generations to come have kind of borrowed this approach from its warm, minimalistic sound. And, 30 years later, this music is still one of the most influential albums, I believe, in hip hop. So I want to start the 90s with the Tribe Called Quest. Rest in peace to Fife Dog. The next album was released in 1992, and I got to shout out Dr. Dre, man, The Chronic. Again, these are not my favorite albums, but when we talk about critically acclaimed and the influence, you cannot understate the influence of The Chronic. So Dr. Dre released The Chronic, and this is, I believe, probably the most important West Coast hip hop album that came out. Dre introduced what we call G-Funk, obviously influenced from Parliament Funkadelic with the deep bass inspired grooves. Dr. Dre has always been top tier from a production perspective, and I believe that sound really dominated the lion's share of the decade. The album also introduced, obviously, Snoop Dogg, The Dog Pound, Lady of Rage, and several others. And I believe it actually raised the bar for hip hop production. Its influence can be heard again to this day across not just hip hop, but R&B and popular music.
Yeah. You look at Dre's involvement on what the last NWA album and how, you thought you think he was at his peak, right? And then to take that sound and then and just elevate into the chronic, and just to be able to have all of these different artists we've never heard of, right? And bring those
Hmm.
all into the mix and, everything. There was no filler cuts on this. You could play it front to back, as everyone has as a certain role, a certain place on this album. This album is sequenced just impeccable. I mean, it's almost like a story, right? From front to back. So classic album. I like that.
Yeah, and I didn't mention the DOC. Obviously, his ghost writing behind the scenes and assisting a young Snoop Dogg. Really, DOC's handprint is all over that album. And although he wasn't able to really contribute from a vocal perspective, obviously he made a lot of contributions from a writing perspective and his mentorship to Snoop Dogg, which Snoop acknowledges, which I respect.
Definitely.
We're gonna go to 1994, and I'm gonna go with Nas Illmatic. I mean, I don't think it's really much to say. I mean, most people would say that this is one of the most important, if not the greatest debut, and arguably one of the best albums of all time. At just 20 years old, I think that's another thing that's really undervalued: the depth and the intelligence, and the social awareness of a 20-year-old that was able to paint vivid pictures of life in Queens, New York. His storytelling, top tier,
Top tier.
poetic lyricism. And then he had an A-list of underground hip hop producers featuring Premier, Pete Rock, Q-Tip, Large Professor, LES. Illmatic became a blueprint for lyrical excellence. And the album, I think it's the album that every serious MC has been measured against since the album was released in 1994.
Yeah, I have to chime in on that. That if that album is not on your top 3 of the '90s, in my humble opinion, right? I mean, that this is an album that is impeccable from start to finish. And like you said, this is a young 20-year-old that is able, that comes into the game with vivid storytelling. Paint a picture that actually puts you in that, you're in the scene, right? You can actually see it with his wordplay and no hardly any guest appearances, right? Yeah, it's like that's the one thing I love
With the
about this
exception
album.
of AZ.
Jay-Z, right? And it's like, the few guest appearances on the album, it's like they were perfect guest appearances, right? It complemented his emceeing. And so it's an album that I feel like that a lot of these MCs have tried to chase, but just fallen short.
Hey man, at that time, you get on the track with Nas, your shit better be sharp.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
We're gonna go to 1995, and one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I did was be inclusive with this particular list. And again, we're not saying these are our favorites, but we are saying that these albums have made a substantial impact in hip hop culture,
Definitely.
and you cannot exclude Goody Mob. Goody Mob Soul Food. I stand by saying that it is the most important Southern hip hop contribution to hip hop. So, Soul Food gave Southern hip hop a voice rooted in community, spirituality, and Black Southern culture. You may not know that my mother's side of the family is actually from rural Georgia.
Okay.
My grandmother is from Reynolds, Georgia, which is outside of Macon. That would be the closest major city next to Reynolds and Roberta. So this is an album that I totally get. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents growing up, so this album, hits home for me. Before Atlanta became, I would say, the hip hop capital toward the later part of the 90s, Goody Mob showed the world there was substance, wisdom, and social commentary coming from the South. Organized Noise, rest in peace to Rico Wade. Their production and the group's honesty helped redefine Southern rap.
Mhm.
I mean, you think about songs like Guess Who and the vulnerability, talking about the love they have for their mothers. All of the artists had versus that loved on their mother. I mean, just a vulnerable, again, just a group that made a lot of contributions, contributed to Outkast. Obviously, T.I. was influenced. Jeezy, Killer Mike was mentored by Organized Noise, Big Boy, and countless others. So again, you cannot tell the story of hip hop, specifically 90s hip hop, without including the Southern region. And if you're going to include the Southern region, you got to include Goody Mob's Soul Food.
Definitely. I'm shocked, man. You know what I'm shocked about? I'm shocked you chose that over Outkast.
I think Outkast is probably the greatest group, but I believe Goody Mob's Soul Food is the most important album out of the Southern region. I respectfully, that's my perspective. Taking a page out of your book, I wanted to throw in a wild card. I wanted to be inclusive throughout the entire decade. So I'm gonna go with the late MF Doom.
Hey,
Operation Doomsday was released in 1999, right before the turn of the century. And MF Doom created one of hip hop's most original artistic identities, emerging after, personal tragedy with, his brother Sub Rock passing away from KMD. Doom reinvented himself as a masked supervillain, combining intricate rhyme patterns, obscure samples, comic book mythology, and the album became a cornerstone in the independent market. Underground hip hop, proving creativity could thrive outside of the mainstream and corporate musical labels, inspiring a generation of lyricists and experimental producers. In closing, the 90s gave us some of hip hop's greatest masterpieces, whether it was Tribe, defining or redefining jazz rap, Dr. Dre changing the sound of hip hop, specifically the West Coast sound, Nas perfecting lyricism, Goody Mob giving the South a voice, or MF Doom reinventing underground hip hop. These albums continue to shape the culture today. This is why the 90s remains one of hip hop's most defining decades. So, on behalf of the RPM Vinyl Pod and my podcast partner, Chris, this is our contribution to Black Music Month with regards to hip hop, specifically noting two critical decades, the 80s and the 90s. For more content, please follow us on all platforms at RPM Vinyl Pod. You can follow my podcast partner, Chris, at Ascension Music, and you can follow me at 1978. That's the number 9, INE, the number 7, and the number 8. That's going to close out this short from the RPM Vinyl Podcast. Again, Black Music Month is our month. Celebrate Black music daily. We're going to close out this month with one more short, but we could not leave out hip hop. Again, on behalf of my podcast partner, Chris, this is Emmanuel, and we'll tap in next time. Peace.
peace.